Hello and welcome to the Green Room with Morton Theater crew. Taking a few minutes today to talk to another one of our own, Mr. Daniel Self. How are you doing today, Daniel?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So, Daniel, what is it that you do? What is your official title here?
Well, my official title is Program Leader for Athens Creative Theatre. And what I'm here to talk about today is my theater specialization, which is music directing.
Cool. And what exactly is that? Give me a little rundown of what it is you do in the context of the theater.
Okay, so a music director works on musicals, obviously, but we work on shows like musicals, and we work alongside the rest of the production team, specifically on the elements of coaching and directing the actors and how to perform the music in the score, and organizing and leading the instrumental accompaniment that would be present for those shows.
Gotcha. And how long have you been doing that with us?
With Athens Creative Theatre, I've been here since 2013, so 7 years.
2013. Wow. So when did you first consider this as an option? When did you start putting your eye on this field of work?
Well, originally this was not my intended field of work. I was pursuing a career in music education. I had a private music studio where I taught instrumental music. I worked in music retail, and I freelanced. But my first experiences with theater music would have been in high school when I worked with our local theater in Dahlonega, the Holly Theater, playing in the pit for some shows there. So those were some of my first exposures. And then in 2013, there was a lead on a job here at the theater, and I applied and, met with Terry and, learned a little bit about what the job would entail. And it was a good fit for me because in addition to music directing, the program leader position includes a lot of other things that I really enjoy and the variety of tasks that I like to do. And that's when I first started music directing larger shows, was when I began at this job. So my directing career began in 2013 when I came to ACT.
Cool. So I know, and I'm sure that there are a handful of people who also know, that your responsibilities here at the theater extend well beyond what happens in the pit. What are some of the other things that you do, outside of the actual production itself? What do you do to prepare?
Yeah, so on the music directing side, a lot of the additional tasks that I would tackle begin before and at auditions. So I'm present for auditions, playing the accompaniments for those auditions and listening to voices to see who might be a good match for the role. So you take kind of a co-pilot seat in casting for musicals. So that starts early in the process. And then throughout the rehearsal process, there are a few different levels that I would operate. Mainly, I would be paying attention to the actors for the first part of the production to see that they're taken care of with the learning needs for the show. Some actors will need some more coaching and resources, or to be connected with vocal coaches and dialect coaches. Some actors won't need a lot of guidance. So a lot of my job is finding out what help they need and how I can best fill those needs for each individual in the cast or each group in the cast. Some other ways that I am involved in preparing for musicals: I attend rehearsals. I think it's really important for music directors to attend as many rehearsals as possible. But more so than giving direction in rehearsal, I spend a lot of time listening. I want to learn the actors and learn the cast and what their tendencies are to do in the musical. Do they tend to run a scene a little long? So when I'm working the score, I need to be mentally prepared for what might happen so that I can adjust in my directing when the shows come up. So a lot of the early process is just, being an available resource, listening, taking note, and learning my score really well. You have to be really familiar with the book in order to effectively music direct, because any live production, it's going to change every time you do it. And it's important, I think, to be flexible enough to make those adjustments in real time with the performers.
Right. You have to, speaking from my experience, I have a little bit of a musical background, not nearly as much as you, I think. But from my experience, you have to memorize a lot more of your music than most onlookers would imagine. You're not just blind reading.
Right. You're not sight reading
play.
by the time the show comes up. You tend to study. For me, I get my scores before even the auditions take place. So once those arrive in the mail, what I typically do is I tend to photocopy my book and put it in a binder. That way I can mark and change it. And then you just discard the books at the end of the production. But I tend to like to make a copy that I can kind of edit in any way I need. Because a lot of times in music directing, your notes are going to be so much and so many that you can't just make them in soft pencil and erase them at the end of the production. It's going to look like a football playbook by the end of the show.
It's funny you should say that. It's almost exactly the same wording Terry used.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's directing, I mean, the choreographer, the director, the music director, we're all going to have our like show Bibles. And I typically carry around 2 books with me the whole production. I have a binder with my scripts and all of my cast member information. I have a binder with my musical score. And then I make all my edits and marks through that. But I begin preparing a month or so in advance of auditions. I continue learning with the cast a lot of times the first few weeks of production because I'm still processing and learning the show as well. And then a lot of that translates in as far as book preparedness. You have to be familiar enough with your score that when you have a orchestra arrive, your focus will then shift from the actors to the musicians, and you need to be familiar enough to communicate the ideas you've been developing over the course of the past 2 or 3 months in just a short few days to those new members of the production, so that your vision for music is then communicated through your musicians and instrumentalists on stage. So you do a lot of processing and learning and a lot of communicating those ideas so that your musicians can then replicate your vision.
So there is a pretty distinct difference between a musical that, say, has canned music and a musical that has a live production. What would you say are some of the primary challenges and advantages of using a live cast of musicians as opposed to, say, a CD?
I mean, I think there are advantages to both, honestly. If you do use canned music, you have the benefit of being able to send your actors home on day one with the exact accompaniment they're going to sing and perform to for the show. So you get more consistency as far as if you have, maybe not the resources for a live orchestra or, you want to use canned music, you do have that luxury of they learn it the way it is and they know how it's going to be. The downside to canned music is if you do get off from the track, the music doesn't adjust to you. So with a live orchestra, you do get that luxury of being able to flex and expand and contract the tempos a little more to fit the actors. With live music, you also get the advantages of we can interpret the music in our own way. So we can decide to come at it from a different angle than a pre-recorded tape. So you get more of an authentic artistic experience, I think, having the live musicians partner with the live actors. And it creates this really kind of neat little dance between the two where you have the actors pulling one way and the orchestra can shift with them. Also the presence in the room. When you go to theater, it's a live experience. You're in the room with the actors, you're seeing the actors on stage. So it's different than watching a show on television because you do have that relationship between the actor and the audience. And with live music in the room as well, there's just something that's hard to replicate through canned music and through a speaker system that you just don't get when you don't have live musicians in the space with you. So, I mean, I prefer live music, but I think I'm a little biased being a musician. I think it's more exciting.
So, what you've been in the game for a while now, so to speak. What are some common misconceptions, or maybe something that people don't typically realize about your position? What's something you would point out?
So for music directors, I think a lot of times there's the assumption that if you're a music director, you are automatically a vocal coach or an expert in all areas of music. And I think, and that's with any profession, I think you meet someone who is a costume designer and be like, oh, you know how to weave fabrics out of nothing. There's oftentimes a misconception that the music director is the authority on all things music oriented. Whereas that's not the case. We each have our strengths and things we really specialize in, and we're all good at the big picture of training the cast. Our job is primarily to train the cast and prepare the cast for the show. That looks a little different from show to show and from director to director. There are some music directors who don't play piano, and that's okay. There are some music directors who are not dialect coaches. Like, I myself could not teach you how to speak in an Irish accent or in a French English accent. I don't have those skill sets, but part of my job then is to help you connect with people who can. So if we have a show that's very heavy on operatic singing styles, if that's not my forte as a singer and musician, my job as a music director is to help bring in those additional coaches and resources. But yeah, I think that's a pretty common misconception in most fields, though, is that when you're in a directorial position, you don't necessarily have to be the master of all things. Do what you're good at, and then allow people to do the things that they're good at, and bring that to the table as well.
I think that's relevant across pretty much all directorial fields.
Yeah,
too, like
I think so, and I think it's the mark of a good director is not to try to be all things.
I think it's good to have sort of a surface knowledge of all things, enough to a point where you can kind of point in the general direction.
Yeah,
you know,
a lot of my job,
right for that position.
As music director, the job is going to be the broad brushstroke. I need to see the big picture. I need to be able to shift the direction of the big picture to fit what the director needs. And a lot of my job is also the vision of the show director. I need to communicate that through music and make the music fit that vision. So it's very much a team effort in that aspect.
So, not trying to throw you under the bus or anything here, but I think it's pretty typical that at least on some occasion, everybody experiences a show that doesn't go as planned. Do you have any notable examples of when a show didn't go the way that it was intended, and how did you react? How did you pull through?
Well, I think no show that I've ever been a director for, or been in the pit orchestra for, has necessarily gone as planned. I don't think it ever really happens exactly as it's written on the page. One of the most notable times I remember, and this was early on in my career with ACT, I had a musician in the pit, which comes in at the very last bit of the production. They're kind of the last element brought in after everyone's already been in this space, already been in costumes, already the lighting design's done, everything's finished. The musicians come in last. They have the shortest contracts, I guess you could say, the shortest time working. I remembered once having, I think it was like the first or second night into a production, to the show run, one of our musicians injured their arm or their wrist and was unable to play. They sustained an injury that basically put them out of the pit. And with those gaps in the pit, it changes the way the actors hear the music. So we had to overnight find a suitable replacement for that person to come in and fill their spot, for basically someone to come in and sight read the show on like the second or third night of the production. So that, I remember,
that's pretty intense. That's no small feat.
Yeah, and for me as a director, that's very stressful, because then you're like, this person doesn't have the luxury of knowing the music as well. And even though they're capable musicians, you still have that like extra awareness of like making sure you're sending good cues that direction. Mm-hmm. You may ignore some actors on stage to send the cue to the sub for those first night or two. But that was something I remember being like a little more stressful than usual.
Not to mention the fact that as you go through the rehearsal of a production, you make a number of changes to the way the music is played, or maybe you skip a section, or you replay a section, or you do something a little differently than it's written, and you got to compact all that information in there.
And it's funny you mentioned that, because a lot of the collaborative element with the, getting the vision from the director, getting the vision of the choreographer, and the vision of the music director all combined, is we do make a lot of cuts. So I spend a lot of time working with each of the other, production leaders, like sitting down with the choreographer and going through how many beats are in this dance break, or she needs 16 more measures to do the choreography they'd like to do. Or the director may want to cut a scene short or extend a scene or want some underscoring that was not originally in there. So we might have to pull a section from earlier on and underscore an additional section of the stage. So yeah, there's a lot of that, and that's why my books usually look like a garbled mess by the end of production. They're like taped in pages or like big X's and arrows pointing to places, and then all that information that I make changes to, I have to communicate 10 to 20 times over when the musicians arrive for them to put in their books. So a lot of it's preparing that like kind of manual or that document when they come into the work, onto work, where they can say, all right, here are my cuts for the show. And some shows there are not many, and some shows there are pages and pages of cuts that we make. I love the shows where we don't make many cuts, but I mean, I'm a little bit of a purist when it comes to the score. I like it in its original form. But I try to make as few cuts as possible. The longer I music direct, I try to make fewer and fewer cuts if I can, just because it streamlines the process, and then you get to hear, the audience gets to enjoy more of the music as it appears.
So, at your time at the Morton, have you? Is there a show that stands out to you? Is there a favorite that you participated in?
Oh, a favorite. I think one of my most memorable ones was my first fall main stage with Athens Creative Theatre. It was my first like music directing gig where I had run the whole production as a music director, and we did Aladdin Jr. the musical. And when I came into the job, the show was already selected, so I didn't have any input as to like what show was being done. So it was like already set. And the thing to remember about junior shows is they don't have orchestration. So the expectation was that we would have an orchestra for the fall show. The selection was Aladdin Jr., which does not have orchestration. So I had to write for permission to arrange orchestration to fit around the piano score. So I remember working for a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, leading up to the production on instrumental parts and writing instrumental books for, I think it was a 14-piece pit orchestra that we had agreed to hire. And it really stretched my skills a lot more out of my comfort zone than I was, maybe expecting from that first fall show. I was like, okay, we'll ease in, we'll learn the ropes. Well, they threw all the ropes at the same time. It was really cool though, going in and arranging it in the style of like Alan Menken, who would have written the Aladdin score. So I listened to a lot of Alan Menken Disney music, and I kind of pulled in some styles and things like that, which I think it was a neat challenge, and it makes it a very memorable show because you don't often get asked to write the orchestration for the show you're directing. So it was a cool show.
I think I would agree with you on the point that oftentimes the shows that I enjoy the most are the ones that take me out of my comfort zone, the ones that really stretch your limits,
Yeah, surely did.
The ones that are easy breezy are often not very memorable.
Right. Yeah. So. The ones you have to work for, you appreciate more, I think. And I think part of the fun of being in live theater, especially in one of the directorial positions, is you have to put in a lot of work. So you become really attached to your shows that you work on. Every show you build this relationship with the book, this relationship with the score, with the story, and the backstory of it. So yeah, you do become really emotionally invested in your work, and I think that's super rewarding. And to get to see all of that hit the stage, and it's super depressing the week after when you have to tear it all down and send it all back to the scene shop. But
sort of a bittersweet moment, like a feeling of accomplishment, but also
right, like we made it,
what do I
but
do
also
with my life now?
what do we do until the next show?
So I guess to kind of combine two questions, what advice would you give to yourself, 13 years ago, or to an aspiring music director, or just anybody who's really interested in musical theater, being a musician in a theater space?
Well, I mean, for me, I was fortunate enough to, by a series of lucky events, to fall into a music director position. that's been a good fit for me. But for any musician who wants to play in pit orchestras or direct shows, just get out into your community and start seeking out those experiences. You can go. I remember volunteering for some musicals to play in some pits when I was first starting off freelancing, just to start kind of getting a sense for it. By no means work for free forever, but it's good. Try it out and see if you like it and see if it's for you. Musical theater playing is really different than playing in a symphony or playing in a rock band, because it's such a dynamic activity that you have to be present for every time you show up, and it changes every time you do a show, even if it's the same book. So I think it's important to get in and try it, see if it's for you. If you're wanting to be in the pit orchestra scene as a musician, learn the music technology, learn to double instruments if you're a woodwind player. Start dabbling in those things, because if you're a keyboard player in a pit orchestra these days, you have to have a good sense of music technology. A lot of what you're doing is going to be driven by your laptop and software. If you're a woodwind player, if you play flute and you're like, I want to play in a pit orchestra, pick up the saxophone, pick up the clarinet if you're able to, and start learning enough to be kind of a triple threat or quadruple threat as you go, because those books are not written just for one instrument. They're written for people who play lots of similar instruments. So it's fun. It's a fun job for someone who likes to dabble in multiple instruments and to really have fun with the music technology, I think.
And one last question for you before we wrap up. So it cannot be overlooked. We are in the middle of a little bit of a global pandemic right now.
Just a bit, yeah.
Just a little bit. How has that affected your work, and how are you adapting to the situation?
That's a great question. So at Athens Creative Theatre, what we've done is we've committed to doing virtual programming and virtual engagement through, I think, about December is what we're looking at. So it's been really different. We don't love not doing productions. It's definitely been really hard, and it was very jarring because we had a couple of shows pulled out from under us at the front end of the pandemic. So you have to process that, and we had to go through all that. But what we're doing is we're doing a lot of virtual plays. We're doing like Zoom style script readings. We're doing a virtual choir every month, so that people can send in videos and still engage with us. And that way, we're doing all of our educational programs online now. So the theater space, as it were, being on the stage and in the theater space has really moved into everyone's homes, which is really kind of cool. It's a little different not getting to interact with everyone face to face. But it's neat to think that we've moved our art space, our creative space from the stage into our living rooms to still have that connection and engagement. Whether we're not really singing together, but the end product, we can see ourselves singing together on screen, or performing together on screen. So it's been really cool. We're adapting as things change, but that's kind of how we've tackled it. We're moving online, or we have moved online. We've learned a lot. I've learned so much about video editing and sound editing in the last 7 months.
Me too, let me tell you.
I feel so like I've grown as a person, I think, through all this. But yeah, you learn patience, which is important to know in theater anyways. So we've been practicing our patience. We're practicing, staying in touch with everyone and engaging. And like as anyone who's interested in being engaged with the theater program, whether it be Athens Creative Theatre or any other theater group, reach out to them online. They probably have something going on that you can be a part of. We have 3 really exciting classes coming up for the fall that we're super thrilled about, that'll have online classrooms. We have guest instructors coming in. So it's giving us a chance to do things maybe a little more than we usually would online. And it's giving us a chance to learn and focus in on some areas of connecting with people that we maybe haven't thought about when we're busy, scurrying around doing live theater.
Do you think any of these changes and adaptations are going to affect you in a more permanent way moving forward?
That's a good question. I hope that a lot of the digital kind of series can stay in some format. I've really enjoyed getting people together for virtual music, even when music comes back in real life. It's neat to be able to create something with someone who maybe lives a little farther away than you would be able to drive together and rehearse and practice with. But I do hope we do keep a lot of the virtual series, like the behind the scenes stuff. Things like we're filming today are really interesting, and I think it's nice because you can't always get out and do a theater class, but you can get on Facebook or Instagram and watch a video. So I like that aspect.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been actually really enlightening for me personally, too.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great talking to you.
This has been The Green Room with the Morton Theater staff. Thank you for stopping by, and we'll see you again next time.
Well, bottle of wine, sipping on a red Monday. Oh, yeah.